Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nandini Mehrortra. I'm a SEPA fellow concentrating on environmental policy, and today I'm going to be using systems thinking to look at enumeration of tigers in India. So the reason I'm doing this is that a couple of years ago, I spent a winter in a tiger reserve in India working on calculating the tiger population census. And as often happens, you go in to figure out one thing and you come out with something completely different. And what I came back with was batteries. They use so many batteries. Each camera trap uses approximately 12 batteries. At each point, there are 2 camera traps. You change it once a week for 3 months in a row, and you have it every 3 kilometers and 44 tiger reserves just in one country. And I'm not even counting that, it goes into billions of batteries every year, basically. And it was ridiculous because all of those were just dumped into the forest as is. And for me, that was ridiculous because there's such an obvious feedback relationship between the two. Because if you're going to dump batteries and contaminate the environment, the soil, the water, and have climate change, that is going to affect the tiger population in the long run. And that was just obvious for me. So when we came to looking at map systems thinking to solve any problem, I was like, there's got to be a better way of doing this. And I came up with the different methods of collection. I broke it down into parts, looked at pros and cons to find an alternative to camera trapping, basically. So first I looked at SCAT, which I realized wasn't actually an option because it only looks at genes and not individuals, so you can't count. And then pug marks or paw marks or paw prints are both inexpensive and environmentally friendly, but I knew that wasn't an option. And that's when I realized that this is really inefficient because I was looking at this problem in isolation when it's actually a part of a much larger system. And I was looking at it from my point of view, whereas actually there's a whole variety of stakeholders. And each of them has their perspective on tiger populations. And explicitly stating those perspectives and relationships actually changes what you identify as the problem. So for basic purposes, both the government and conservationists are trying to increase tiger populations. The poachers are trying to sell their body parts for income purposes, and the locals are the ones that generally don't have much of a say, and they have the most complex relationship with both tiger populations and all the other stakeholders in question. So as you all know, India is quite overpopulated, and that doesn't just mean that we have less space and cities for people, but that also means that we don't have a lot of space for our wildlife. So these people are actually sharing spaces, homes with wildlife. That means that actually on a day-to-day basis, it's a threat for them. A tiger is a threat to their life, their livestock. So that is a very direct relationship for them, for tigers. But beyond that, the government is trying to protect these tigers. So they're moving people out of core forest areas into buffer zones because they're trying to create laws. And that means a lot of people are displaced from their homes. They aren't given adequate compensation. They can't go back into the forest for collecting timber, fruits, which they used to for aiding their income. And that just creates a lot of resentfulness for them towards the whole system and the tiger conservation resentment project because they aren't being given the kind of compensation that they should. And it makes them so vulnerable that poachers can actually take advantage of them because they don't have many alternatives for income. So they use them to find ways into the forest for making the traps to capture tigers. And that's how I managed to put it into a broader framework. So now we look at the problem of tigers, keeping in mind stakeholders and environments. And we see that the main problems that we need to address are habitat protection, destruction, and poaching. So why am I focusing on methods of data collection when this is the real problem? That is the real problem. But Project Tiger actually started in India in 1973, addressing these very problems. And they were using pug marks to monitor their progress. And every year they told us that the number of tigers are increasing, but every year people went into the forest and saw lesser tigers. And we were just told that there's no need to worry because the populations are stable, because we have the data for it. Until eventually conservationists had to go into the field, and we found that in some of the reserves there were no tigers left. So in 2005, Sariska became the first tiger reserve to go to zero population, and there were more to follow, which just like put in how important it was to have efficient ways of collecting data, not just scientifically, but also keeping in mind the local context. And this is finding ways of collecting data isn't actually going to solve the whole problem of tiger conservation, but it is important, and that's what I'm trying to do over here. So I went back to this problem, and I'm looking at what we need to do now, and now I broadened what we needed to know that we need not just something that's environmentally friendly, but also economical, because India is a developing country. Whatever money you spend has a high opportunity cost, and is efficient not just scientifically, but also in the local context. And none of what we have right now actually fulfills everything that we need, but as of now, camera traps are the best option because they are efficient, and they're actually helping not just for population calculations, but also for other scientific research, and they actually capture pictures of poachers as well. And the cost has already been covered by the government. It's a sunk cost, so there's not much you can do about it. But I still believe that there is something we can do better than what we are. And the batteries, like I said, were a major problem for me. So looking at the whole thing again, in the larger perspective, I came up with what we can do as a current solution. And I focused on the batteries, and I said, oops. And you can't really see it here, but basically, I came up with a two-part approach. First being that we should invest in rechargeable batteries, just because I did some calculations that probably aren't so accurate, but it was enough to know that the amount of money we're spending every year on batteries, it would really help to just invest in rechargeable batteries. So that would save a lot of money for the government. Hopefully that will incentivize them to go for that approach. But we should do this only and only if we have a locally run recycle center. Firstly, it only makes environmental sense if we have that, because the materials that rechargeable batteries are made with are actually a lot more toxic. So if you aren't recycling them after you're done, once they can't be used anymore, it makes no sense whatsoever. And secondly, having something like that could provide some locals a stable source of income. And that would be hopefully reduce some kind of their feelings towards the government, the resentment, and also just it hopefully even reduce their desire to work with poachers, because that's a pretty unsafe and risky option. It's not even stable. And at least for some people, this would provide a better alternative. Plus, it's not just batteries that forests and batteries in this system. These are people living there, literally millions of people inside the forest. So they have plastic and all their waste, and there is no formal method of waste disposal. So it would help their surroundings so much, and it would help the general environment in the area to a large extent. So in conclusion, what I got out of personally this process is, of course, firstly, looking at the whole thing in context and explicitly stating the perceptions and relationships, which helped me break it down. But also that I know earlier I was looking at it in isolation, and it helped to look at it in a broader framework. But for me personally, I think what a lot of us face is that we want to tackle issues that are really huge and they seem really intimidating. And we generally feel like it's unapproachable because it just has so many parts and components. And maybe, at least for me, if we look at smaller parts of the problem in the same context, it might be a way to find different solutions. Thank you so much.